Hello everyone, welcome to Citizens Talk. As we know, Sri Lanka today faces an unprecedented environment where we face several challenges on numerous aspects. Citizens Talk presents that platform where we get the opportunity to invest notable professionals, academics and industry leaders in finding the right and correct solutions to present a better Sri Lanka or to present a better way forward. So today, joining me, we have Dr. Tara Dimel. Dr. Tara Dimel was the former secretary to the Ministry of Education. She is also the co-founder of Education Forum Sri Lanka and also is a member of the Worldwide Commission to Educate All Kids after the post-pandemic session. So welcome, Dr. Tara, for this forum. Today's topic that we have decided to discuss is the education system of Sri Lanka. So my very first question to Dr. Tara is, as we know, today's education system faces several challenges. With the pandemic, many kids have been deprived of their rightful education. Many would say due to challenges not unique to them as well. So, but however, we are also seeing there is a rise in migration amongst the youth as well. So my very first question, Dr. Tara, is in terms of the current education system, is it catering for the job requirement of today's world?
The big question is whether the Sri Lankan education system actually caters to the skills and the training and the required necessities, competencies for a 21st century education and employment scenario. That's the biggest challenge that we need to answer. Because the Sri Lankan education system, the curricula, the types of teaching are known to be very archaic. The models are ancient in that cognitive skills that are really necessary in today's context, like the ability to think creatively, to imagine, to be inquisitive, and not to be passive learners, but to be active learners, replacing rote learning. Those are not yet seen in our education system. So from the primary school onwards, there has to be a drastic shift in how we teach, what we teach, and how the teachers are trained to teach these so that learning becomes more active and we have students who are really prepared to face the challenges of the 21st century. So to add to that, you mentioned the post-pandemic challenges, which are massive. The education crisis became like an invisible crisis in the pandemic because the health and the economic crises were the ones that were extremely visible. The Sri Lankan education system suffered much more than most countries in the pandemic period, simply because the online learning, the ability for children to seamlessly switch from in-person classroom learning to online education using devices and the internet was very sparse. I think everybody now knows that less than 50% of the students had actual access to online learning, access to internet and suitable devices. So it was a serious challenge that students have faced. Even today, schools have opened, yes, but still we don't have 100% enrollment. Students attend school on a rotational system. 50% of the students attend today, the second 50% attend tomorrow. And the others are expected to catch up through online learning, which, like I mentioned, is not a reality. So the challenges are multiple. The emotional challenges, the mental health issues of kids being locked in homes for well over 20 months has been a largely neglected topic. And we've had other serious concerns, like, for example, the problem concerning the teachers who initially did a huge job in trying to make the students reach education. But in the second part of the pandemic, as we know, they went on trade union action for a variety of reasons. So the Sri Lankan education system has huge gaps. The skills that are required globally to match employment are not available to our students. Young people are migrating in large numbers because they feel that the kinds of education, training, and employment that they would like is not available to them. There's a significant disappointment among young people. So all in all, the picture is very black, not gray. And I think something has to be done really soon to prevent an exodus of skilled young people leaving the shores of Sri Lanka.
Yes. So, Dr. Thara, do you think the Sri Lankan government has this capacity or the sufficient funding to invest in the education system or to overcome the challenges that you mentioned?
Yes, I think the Sri Lankan government, if they are committed to invest in their people and to build human capital, yes, there should be enough funds for the education sector. But the most important decision to make is how much they prioritize education. Take, for example, in the most recent budget, I think out of the total budgetary allocation, the amount they had set aside for education was something a little more than 6%, which is very, very little in comparison with even our South Asian neighbors and low and middle income countries. So, investing in education is a must. Smart investment is a must. What I mean by smart investment is, whilst investing in infrastructure and on recurrent expenditure, it is imperative that the government invests in quality, improving the quality of education. And what I mean by quality is improving the textbooks, the curriculum changes, the teacher training, equipping teachers with the necessary skills and the modern day techniques necessary for imparting 21st century education is a high priority. So, capacity wise, I think definitely the education system officials, those who are in the provinces and in the central ministry, in the NIE and all the key agencies of the ministry have adequate capacity. What is needed, in my personal opinion, is the vision, a serious political commitment, non-interference in the implementation of a vision, and empowering officials, principals and teachers to take a reform that is visionary and compatible with 21st century needs into the classroom or into the university or into the higher education institutions.
Dr. Dimel, do you see, as of now, is there equity in education or is it happening now?
I seriously don't think there is equity in education. Because you see the large numbers of students from rural, lower socioeconomic, impoverished areas of the country not having the type of access to education, even English education and certainly digital learning and computer education in the same way that their peers in the urbanized settings would have. And also the pandemic exposed this massive divide, not just the digital divide, but the divide in education access, so much so that the tuition masters had to fill in the gaps to make sure that students who didn't have access the way they should have had access in the pandemic period. So, we have a massive gap in the provision of resources and even in the provision of teacher training and the provision of good quality teachers in the peripheral schools. So, there is a huge area that we have to all be very concerned about. Free education is often used as a slogan, but education, in my opinion, today in Sri Lanka is not free. It is very much paid for, because even in the very, very rural areas, tuition has become something that most parents have to find the money to somehow make sure that their children have access to education. So, this is something that is a diametric shift from what CWW Kannangara aimed for, and I think if we are to move from where we are now to digital learning, artificial intelligence and the other very relevant 21st century skills in education, it's very important to provide access and equity. So, there has to be a paradigm shift in how we look at this whole subject in the future.
It's interesting that you spoke about digital learning. I think as we've seen over the years, there's been a number of voluntary programs that has tried to bring in technology, digitization, and one of the latest programs is the Sakpala program that was initiated by the opposition leader. And also what has happened with the Sakpala program is there's a lot of the smart board context, then in terms of digital streaming and so on, there's a lot of facets that have been brought in. So can I just know, would such programs be beneficial in transforming the education system? And can I get your opinion on it, Dr. Tara?
Undoubtedly, yes. I think you already know that less than maybe 35% of students in Sri Lanka have access to computers and PCs, laptops for their education. Similarly, we find that less than 5% of school students have access to any form of smart boards, the type you described that is now being popularized. So we cannot have a situation where we just have on and off donations given by people, and this particular program which I read about, the Sakpala program, is extremely laudable because it has chosen places in the country where the students have no access to computer education or internet education or the ability to enter a digital learning platform. This is the type of thing that the government has to launch. Governments have to start launching these, actually not today, but yesterday. So unless students are in a position where they can access material on the internet, they can use a search engine, they are comfortable with using digital tools, they will never become digital literate. Literacy and numeracy are just very, very archaic tools of measuring an education system. Like literacy would simply mean being able to simply read or simply write something. But digital literacy means you're able to actually use digital tools, use the internet, and be very comfortable in a digital learning platform. So definitely more and more programs like Sakpala should be launched, and I'm repeating again, this has to be done by the government. Whatever else is done by others will only support such an initiative. Today the world is talking about education and artificial intelligence and how AI is introduced into the curricula. In countries like Singapore, primary school students are learning coding. Teacher training institutions in countries like Finland and UK and Singapore are using coding and computer programming in teacher training curricula. So in such a situation in Sri Lanka, less than 10% of the 10,100 schools have access to science, technology and information technology classrooms. So definitely we need more and more initiatives like this, and almost all schools should be included in this type of initiative where digital learning becomes part of the curriculum, part of the norm and part of the teacher training programs. It's a must.
So Dr. De Mel, what are the major changes that you see should be implemented in the education system if we are to see tangible results?
Yeah, for starters, I think the government has to place education at the center of the national development agenda and not just pay lip service to it, but be very sincere in its commitment. Place digital learning and all the newer technology-based education requirement right at the forefront of an education agenda. The 21st century skills have to be very much on top of any initiative that is being planned. To do all of this, firstly, the political commitment, the will, empowerment of the officials, like I mentioned earlier, and there has to be funding allocated. You just can't have wishes, aspirations, and rhetoric without having the matching funding allocated. So any new education initiative policy will have to include how much money the government is setting aside. If such a thing happens in 1 or 2 years, you can't have education reforms taking years and years to be rolled out, because every year a new batch of students leaves school, and every year a new batch comes in. So you must have these all students who are coming in every year to be able to access new reforms so that they are equipped with the necessary skills and the training to face a modern job market, not just in Sri Lanka, but overseas. You find students, high school students and university students in countries like India and some other is in the neighborhood, being headhunted for high quality employment. Sri Lanka too can enter such a scenario where students in Sri Lanka who have that innate intelligence and ability, all they need is to be equipped with skills, education and training so that they too can be headhunted for high quality jobs like jobs in relation to technology and IT, and maybe to get into the startup ecosystem, build unicorns, which are companies which are $1 billion worth. So those are the jobs of the future, and Sri Lankan students have to be prepared and equipped to face such job markets, not in the distant future, but very soon.
In an ideal situation, where do you see Sri Lanka's education system in the next 5 to 8 years from now?
In the ideal system, I would love to see the Sri Lankan schools being transformed, the Sri Lankan classrooms becoming smart classrooms, Sri Lankan teachers and their teacher training institutions being like what we see and read about in the developed world. Students in Sri Lanka, like I said earlier, being headhunted for high quality jobs, where we too, like our Indian counterparts, have very big science and industry based institutions, high quality IIT, IIM kind of institutions, and research and development being put at the top of the agenda so that research on new initiatives in curricula like AI related subjects, data science, robotics, and all those current topics that are in the conversation in the global education platforms enter into our system so that our students, when they leave school, become extremely capable, confident, and have the capacity to function in a really developed 21st century setting.
My final question, Dr. Tara, as we know, if you take countries like Bangladesh, they have built a large amount of freelance IT professionals and so on. So, and also if you look at it from a foreign investor's perspective, in terms of drawing in more foreign direct investment, they look at the skilled pool of professionals or the talent that is available. So in terms of marketing Sri Lanka as a country which has a skill pool and so on, what sort of measures that you can propose to the current government or future governments?
For starters, a radical shift in the approach to our tertiary education system. Currently we have 16 state universities and a large number of higher education institutions and degree awarding institutions that are in play. To make sure that these tertiary education institutions, including universities, place these types of specialities like you mentioned at a very high premium, and to make sure that they entice and encourage school leavers to join these disciplines in their universities. For that, obviously, a lot of emphasis has to be given to IT related subjects, technology related subjects, that is biotech, fintech, information tech, all the technologies. Apart from investing, allowing them also, give them the incentives to build their own companies, incentivize them in a variety of ways, perhaps through tax concession and others, and most importantly through partnerships, building partnerships with related companies and higher education institutions in the region and elsewhere, so that best practices can be shared, ideas can be shared, and we can have an exchange of very high quality star class lecturers, university academics and researchers coming and going, so that Sri Lanka becomes part of not just an Asian map, but the global map in relation to this type of discipline and subject. And more importantly, to popularize Sri Lanka as a hub, like you mentioned, like what Bangladesh is doing. We have enough of young people who have the basic, innate, necessary qualities and the skills to be able to come to that level. Equip them, train them, and make sure they are in a position to provide this kind of skills training themselves, as well as perform in outsourcing jobs, and also to become very much sought after for these different types of skills when overseas partners seek Sri Lankans for such jobs. So I think all these are possibilities. The bureaucratic red tape has to be cut. I think the BOI has a huge role to play here, and also to advertise Sri Lanka's skills and talents overseas, and also enable these young people to do their own startups, to build their own companies. So to release all the knots that are currently preventing them from doing that, even to transcend this current economic crisis, so that we keep back as much as possible, as many talented people as possible back in the country, so that we don't lose any more brains than we are losing right now.
Thank you, Dr. Tara de Mel, for joining us today on Citizens Talk, and we look forward to meeting you all with another eminent personality in the coming weeks. Thank you.